We are going to start section 8.5, which is beginning to factor our polynomials. Factoring, remember, is the opposite of multiplying, so I'm finding what things will go into my big one. And so you're going to find the two factors that will go into a big polynomial. And before we do that, we're going to just practice one part of the process, which is doing these sum and product puzzles. So what we're going to do is you're going to be given two different numbers and you're going to have to figure out what fits into these two examples here. So I have a 9 at the top and a -6 at the bottom on set 1 of the sum and product puzzle. And so what we're doing is the top number is what you have to multiply by. So you might make a little note that I have to find factors of 9. And I have to find those factors that will add or subtract to -6. Okay? So the top is where you multiply, the bottom is where we have to add. So I'm going to list all my factors of 9. So all my factors of 9, if you pull out your factor sheet, are 1 and 9, 3 and 3. What we have to do is we have to figure out which set will add or subtract to -6. So if I add 9, I get 10. If I subtract 1 and 9, I get 8. So neither of those will add to the -6. If I add 3 and 3, I get 6. If I subtract 3 and 3, I get 0. So the thing that I would want to use is I would be using 3 and 3. Now here's the part that people tend to forget. When I'm multiplying, we have different sign rules. So if I want this to add to a negative, that means my sign rules will both be positive or they will both be negative. And so in this case, they would both be negative in order for them to add to -6. Now if you're not very good with sign rules, Mr. Gahan has created kind of a cheat sheet and we posted it to Canvas, which I will make sure that we get a copy for you. So the cheat sheet tells you what your sign rules are. So on the previous one, we had a positive on top and a negative on bottom. So that told me that I had to have two negatives on the sides in order for it to work out. So if you're struggling with the sign rules, we can print one of those so that can help you with to figure out what your signs are. Let's take a look at another example. So on example 2, we are trying to find factors of 4 that will add or subtract to 4. Well, there's only two sets of factors for 4, 1 and 4, 2 and 2. So I go through and I add and subtract them. So when I add 1 and 4, I got 5. When I subtract, I got 3. So that doesn't work. Then I do the next set. 2 and 2 adds to 4. So right away, I know that my answer is going to be 2 and 2. Then I would come over and look at my signs. I need this to multiply to positive again. So that means if it's multiplying to a positive, that both of them have to be the same. And since I need a positive 4, that means I want both of them to be positive. Okay, let's look at one more and then I'll have you try one of them. Number 3, we have -30 on top and we have -13 on bottom. So I need all of the factors of 30. So ignore the sign for the time being, okay? So all my factors of 30, I have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. So now I'm going to go through and add and subtract all of those. So adding 31, subtracting 29, not that set. Then I do the next set. Adding 2 and 15, I get 17. Subtracting, I get 13. So possibly could be that. Adding those, I get 13. Subtracting those, I get 7. So could be that. Adding 5 and 6, I get 11. Subtracting, I get 1. So in this case, we have two sets that possibly could work. So what that means is it's going to depend on my signs. Okay? So if I looked at the top, I need to multiply to a negative. So the only way I can multiply to a negative is if I have one positive and one negative number. Well, if I'm going to add to a -13, that means that I could change signs, so I could try -2 plus 15 and then swap them. Well, the one that gives us -13, sorry, is 2 and -15. So that would be the one that I would plug in there. Sorry. So sometimes people just kind of play around with them, but if your sign rules are pretty good, you can just know that if this is negative, then the bigger number has to be negative. So when I put the sign on there, that's how I knew which one would give me the right answer. And again, if you're struggling with your signs, you can use your sign sheet. All right, why don't you try number 4 and see if you can get it, and then check back and see if you have the right answer. So on number 4, you had -84 on top, +5 on bottom. So you're factoring out all the factors for 84, which is a whole bunch. I go through and I add and subtract until I find which set will subtract or add to 5. So that set is 7 and 12. My top number is negative, so that means the sign rules have to be positive and negative. If my bottom number is positive, then the bigger number has to be positive. So that's how I know 12 is positive and 7 is negative, so that when I add them, they give me +5. If this is still unclear, let one of us know so that we can help you. Otherwise, you can fill out the rest of these, which is on the front and the back.